Well, hello everyone. So welcome to the first panel today, which will be about state capture, academic approaches to state capture. My name is Dušan Pavlović. I teach at the Faculty of Political Science here in Belgrade. And today I have two presenters and one discussant who will all together try to figure out what's the role of state capture in the Balkan societies and political systems. So let me first introduce the presenters. Andrea CAPUSSELA is independent researcher, but he is currently a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. Then Iurij ZARUBIN, also a researcher, and Miloš. These two will present their views about state capture. And Miloš RESIMIĆ, who is a post-doctoral fellow at the International Center for Study of Institutions and Development, will also be with us, and he will discuss the presentations and the ideas that will be put forward by the two presenters. So without further ado, we can begin. Andrea, will you be so kind to take the floor first and within 5 minutes to introduce your views about state capture and its relevance for Balkan societies?
Very good. Thank you very much. My paper tries to cast some doubt on the usefulness of the state capture literature for security studies, and to suggest that the literature on institutions and social orders, and perhaps also the collective action problem, might be more useful. In the paper, the part in which I discuss the limitations of the state capture literature is much shorter than the pars construens, in which I discuss the advantages of that other literature. Now I'll do the reverse, and I'll focus more on the pars destruens, and maybe if we have time for questions, maybe we can go further on the other part. My starting point, my assumption, is that, in one word, the problem chiefly concerns domestic elites that, for whatever reason, fail to provide liberty, dignity, and prosperity to their citizens. And here the problem is twofold, I suppose. On one hand, facing distrust or discontent, such elites might seek to raise their legitimacy, their internal legitimacy, by opting for a more aggressive foreign policy stance. On the other hand, bad elites might provoke a breakdown of political stability internally, which might have external repercussions. So the question is whether the notion of state capture can help those interested in security to understand these domestic phenomena that have external repercussions. State capture is a powerful metaphor and a convenient one, no doubt. Its problem, I think, is that this metaphor evokes an event, and one which has either happened or has not happened, black or white. A city can either be captured or can survive the attack. A horse can be captured or remains free. The literature that uses this concept is far more sophisticated and nuanced, of course, but it does employ fairly sharp distinctions, and especially that distinction between the three notions: state capture on one hand, mere elite influence, or normal corruption on the other hand. The seminal paper on this literature, published in 2000, defines state capture as, I quote, "the efforts of firms to shape and influence the underlying rules of the game," that is, legislation, rules and decrees, through private payments to public officials, end of quote. So, influencing the rules of the game through payments to officials. Now, compare this passage with a very recent article on contemporary Western capitalism by the chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, Martin Wolf. I quote, "Corporations are powerful entities able to exercise immense influence within society. Who makes the rules of the game? Well, we know quite well that a dominant influence is the power of money. Companies, as lobbyists, funders of research, and donors, play a decisive role in creating the rules of the political game. Corporations are not players of the game, playing according to rules set by others. They play the game according to rules that they largely set themselves. End of quote. Note the passages: immense influence, dominant influence, decisive role. They are not players of the game, but they set the rules themselves. This more or less satisfies the definition of state capture I just gave you. But if a theory tells us that there is fairly little difference between a phenomenon usually associated with weak states, state capture, and what now happens in some of the most advanced and sophisticated democracies, then this theory is not very useful for those who want to understand the external implications of domestic policy. It is true that Wolf, in this passage, is not arguing that corporations systematically make illicit payments to public officials to shape the rules of the game. This is part of the state capture definition. And this is a difference, of course. But surely the degree of influence that companies or economic elites gain matters much more, also for the security scholar, than the means by which it is acquired, corruption or something else. Especially because the distinction often hinges on legalistic distinctions between campaign contributions, lobbying, and revolving doors on one hand, and outright bribery on the other. These are things that may often differ less on their substance than on the timing and specificity of the quid pro quo, which is everywhere. So, to conclude, the state capture literature is certainly valuable in understanding the signs and effects of these phenomena, but to understand their causes and variations, one might wish to look also at the literature that focuses more on social structures than on the events that make these structures apparent. And what I have in mind, as I said, is the literature on institutions, social orders, and the collective action problem, which, taken jointly, seeks to explain the allocation of power in societies, the structures that underpin it, and the conditions of its stability and change. So, and I'll be delighted to, if we have time, to say a bit more about this literature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much. So we'll go in the following order. Iurij ZARUBIN will be next, and then Miloš RESIMIĆ will discuss both presentations. But I will just take this opportunity to invite everybody who is watching now to ask questions over platforms that via which you are following this, and then we'll answer this. We'll address these questions in the end, in the last part of the presentation. So, Iurij, please, the floor is yours. Please constrain yourself, just like Andrea did, within the 5 minutes. Šta, nema kontakta? Huh? Okay, so because we have technical difficulties with connections, let's then move on to Miloš RESIMIĆ's comments and discussions. Miloš, can you at least go through?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Dušan, and thank you, Andrea, for a very interesting paper. I really enjoyed reading it. I have two short comments slash questions. So my first question is a big one. So basically, what can be done in order to stop the predatory behavior of elites? The question that you somewhat address in your paper, and you say that that firms most of the times tend to reinforce inefficient and unfair institutions, and this is because they tend to face the coordination problems. And I would like to briefly, before my question, mention recent literature that in a way tries to deal with the question of coordination problems, and focusing on Russia and Ukraine, and which basically argues that firms who are able to establish alliances with foreign shareholders, foreign banks, international arbitration courts, or a labor force are actually able to successfully defend themselves from the predatory attacks of political elites and connected economic elites, because they raise the costs of predation for political elites. And I was curious about your view about usefulness of this strategy in the Western Balkans. Do you see that this strategy might be viable for firms here who would actually, by establishing these kind of alliances in a bottom-up fashion, be able to first initially defend their property rights, and then over a long period of time build coalitions which would actually push for strengthening of the rule of law, which would limit the selectiveness of the process of predation by political elites. And my second point is about the role of institutions, which you also talk about extensively in the paper, which are of course important to understand the state capture. But in my view, they seem to be a little bit ambiguous, because on one side we do see examples of countries such as Hungary and Poland, who were once considered cases of success in post-communist transition, who developed fairly robust formal and informal institutions, as well as market institutions. And then at some point, like in the case of Hungary, started rapidly to decline towards autocratic practices, and to build what some authors called post-communist mafia state, in which, in a top-down manner, political elites facilitate state capture. And on the other side, we have cases like Western Balkans, where from the very beginning you had informal actors hijacking the process of building formal institutions in the context of very weak state capacity, very weak bureaucracies. So considering these different types of cases, I would be curious to hear your views about where do institutions come in understanding better the risks of state capture. So those would be my two questions for you.
Okay, thank you, Miloš. Andrea, please.
I will begin with the last question on institutions. The literature I have in mind, as you suggested, distinguishes between formal institutions, informal institutions, and it argues that what really matters for economic performance and for the functioning of any political system is the way in which formal and informal institutions interact with each other and how they are actually applied. And this depends on the kind of social order that each society has, and social order is again a brief metaphor to allude to, I think, the allocation of power within a society and the degree to which it is contestable, it is open to competition. So this is why you see often the phenomenon of saying the same formal institutions, such as, for example, the independence of the judiciary or competition laws or the prohibition against corruption. These are all institutions in this sense, functioning very differently in different countries. In well-established democracies, consolidated states, the independence of the judiciary tends to provide impartiality and reliable and, let's say, efficient decisions. In weak states, the formal independence of the judiciary simply creates unaccountable judiciaries that are more free to follow the wishes of the political elite. So institutions are important because they give shape to the incentives of actors, citizens, politicians, firms, political elites, military elite, economic elites, but they are not the end of the story. You have to understand what shapes institutions, and these are chiefly the allocation of power within society. This explains in some sense the ambiguity that one has when the discussion goes into institutions. I am not an expert in what happened in Hungary or Poland, but I suppose that there you have similar problems. Some of those institutions could be subverted or changed, even formally, because the allocation of power allowed it in a way. This links to your first question, if you like, the coordination problem, because if in a society you have a small elite that engages in predation, that typically happens at the expense of the vast majority of the population. So the question is how is this possible? And the answer, of course, is that organized minorities tend to be stronger than disorganized majorities. So you have the coordination problem. If the majority of people cannot bring themselves to organize, to pursue their common interests, they will be defeated by organized minorities, which is what we often see in the states, the Balkans. This is really the main coordination problem. At the development stage at which the region is, I'm not sure that firms one can hope too much in firms, because firms, especially important ones, firms that belong to the economic elite, in the current situation, their rationality will lead them to rather collude with the political elite, even if this entails risks. But the gains that can be obtained in the short term by colluding with the elite are, I think, greater than the future gains that they could obtain by challenging these elites and, if you like, forming a sort of counterpoise or counterbalancing power. It is only when you have a large number of maybe medium-sized firms that cannot depend on collusion with the elite that the business sector can become a counterweight to the political elite, I suppose.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for this answer. Let's move on to the next speaker. We have Iurij ZARUBIN online. Iurij, can you? Are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Excellent.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, the picture is frozen, so can you hear us, Iurij?
Yeah.
Okay, so please, the floor is yours. Next 5 minutes is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. My research focus on the conceptualization and game theoretical modeling of policy of secrecy, but I try to present it in a simple way. So let's try to imagine a simple black box. Maybe it's made of cardboard or plastic or something else. And some man looking like Agent Smith put something in this black box. We are on the kid's position and ask him, "What are you doing here?" He answers that I'm make my job. I sacrifice and classify the information. We have 3 questions. First is, what is this black box? This black box is a place to store classified information, and this is obvious. What other these papers or piece of papers which he put on this black box? The second answer is that this is documents containing classification information. Yep. And third question. It is very important question. Why these papers are classified? And in this case, we can have two different answers. First answer is about an open basis of secrecy. In this case, we can see the logic of secrecy and understand why this agent put this paper in this black box. We can look at the inside the black box and understand what types of information are there. And second type of answer is about refusal to answer. Agent answers that the list of secrecy information is secrecy. And some secret persons understand which is what is secrecy and what is not secrecy. We can't look at, and we can't answer the questions the agent of control. So we can't look at this black box. This black box is metaphor of secrecy policy. And in this metaphor, we can look at open secrecy policy and closed secrecy policy. And agent with agent behavior with black box is the institute of secrecy on some state. So go further. If we go try to understand who we are in this case, we are the principals, and we have agent, principal, and agent of control. So we have standard agent, principal agent model. Try to imagine another picture. We have several black boxes. And they are different sizes. Near these black boxes, there are different pools, and these different pools is different sizes too. At firstly, we can look at the black box and understand that in one case we have pretty little black box, and in another case we have big, thick black marker painted container. This is a view to the policy of secrecy from position of policy. And we can put these black boxes in the pools, because in the every country have its own secret policy, and this is black box, and its own volume of pool of open data. And we can drop this black box in this open data and try and analyze to which volume of water we can see. So what is the capacity of this policy of secrecy? Okay. It can and the next picture. We can try to look at the case of identical data. In one country, in the case of one country, we have corpus of data which are open, but in the other closely country, we can see to the same corpus of data, but it is classified.
Iurij, I would like you. I would like to ask you just if you can wrap it up, because maybe a minute or so to wrap it up.
Okay. Problem. We have a problem when case of classified data is classified but unknown reason. And in this case of closed secrecy policy of secrecy, we have institutional gap. And we can try to look behind this institutional gap to understand the formal and informal rules which place in this case, and some culture of agents. And if we can understand the informal rules, we can understand what is potential abuse of agents to play this game in this case, and in differential cases, and what can we camouflage in this case. That's all, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Iurij. That was Iurij ZARUBIN with his presentation about state capture from principal agent framework. Now, before I give floor to Miloš RESIMIĆ and his discussion, let me once again invite everybody who's watching now to ask their questions. We already received a couple of them, and in the end, we are going to try to answer some of them. So, Miloš, the floor is yours for your discussion and questions.
Thank you, Dušan, and thank you, Iurij, for a nice presentation. My main concern is about the applicability of principal agent framework to studying state capture. It seems to me that the literature on state capture in general became, in a way, a victim of this early scholarship by Hellman and collaborators, which kind of portrayed state capture as this unidirectional process, bottom-up process, in which you have strong autonomous business actors, oligarchs, who co-opt the state for their narrow interests. Because in reality, in empirical reality, we see that this is a much more complex process. It's more of a collective action, and very rarely you see that either business or political actors act independently to achieve their goals. So this is more of a interdependent process with various incentives, and I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit more about the justification of principal agent framework for studying state capture? And related to that, the second point is how this framework understand the changes in the structure of state capture within a country. If you look Russia, for example, a case which I'm sure you're familiar with, we had very different phases in how the state capture was structured. From the 90s, where you had these wild privatizations, during which, in the context of underdeveloped institutions, oligarchs managed to hijack the state, to post-2000 period, when Putin kind of reshaped the whole system in a top-down manner, developed very professional tax authority, which then is used in a kind of selective fashion to target enemies of the regime. So how does this framework capture these different structures of the phenomenon in the same countries, let's say? So that's all from me.
Yeah, Iurij, please feel free to answer the questions and comment.
From the case of we have some problem of convergence of anonymity. The model of principal agents model can explain the analog of convergence of secrecy, because after 2000s
Well, it seems we lost Iurij again. Are we going to wait to re-establish the connection, or? Shall we then move on and get back to Iurij? Okay, so let's then try to answer some of the questions that we received in the meantime by our viewers. So the first one is from Artan Cholaku from Kosovo. Question for all panelists, but a must for Andrea. So Andrea, pay attention. What, in your opinion, is the role of Western institutions and actors involved in state building in the Balkans and beyond? Mainly relying on securitization paradigm in entrenching state capture in mindsets of authoritarian elected rulers in the region. So basically the role of Western institutions, Western actors, I guess the EU actors as well, in producing state captures. Andrea, can you
Yes.
address the question?
Yes, I think it's a very pertinent question. External actors have been very important in the region since the wars. They are a third actor, if you like. There are domestic elites, there is the population, and there is the external actor. In principle, they worked in favor of establishing good institutions, let's say, good practices. In practice, they didn't really do that, certainly not all the time, because it is much easier to deal with the domestic elite than with an inevitably messy democratic system and competitive economy. If having elites in place is fairly easy because you can negotiate with them. You know who they are, you know what their power is, and you can ask them what you need from them, offering something in exchange. I think this has often happened, and the effects are those we see. I don't discuss this very much in this paper, but in other things I wrote, I discussed this at some length. Now, how this is linked to securitization policies, I cannot really comment because I'm fairly ignorant in the field of security studies. I know something about the foreign policies of the region and the security situation of the region, but only indirectly, only because that was interesting for my own studies and for my own work before. But I cannot say much about securitization. But certainly, going back to the beginning of my answer, certainly one of those exchanges between domestic elites and the external actors, be they Brussels or Washington or someone else, were questions of security. In part, I think, tolerance for predation, internal predation, was exchanged with regional peace in a way, or with a pledge by domestic elites not to put, not to create turbulence at the regional level. Which is a problem, by the way, because the moment these elites starts to lose their grip on their societies or realize that predation is no longer possible, they might, by a reaction, be inclined to try to stimulate unrest in the region. Is a kind of blackmail that they can use against the external actor, but also against their own populations. So, this is another reason why that exchange was, I think, damaging in the medium to long term.
Thank you, Andrea. While we are waiting, do we have ZARUBIN again back online? Yes, we do. So Iurij, please, you were disconnected by the higher force. So please go on, continue where you left off.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, we have a convergence of and what height behind this convergence of secrecy? We just can say that we have some problem and the vector of problem. We can't imagine the level of corruption in Secret Service because we don't have a data. We can't imagine what a secret, what level of corruption was in a Secret Service in 19th or 20th. So, but we face the level of the capacity of this black box and compare this black box with open data and the same economical and technological development countries. So this capacity is the outcome of principal agent model. This is main outcome, I think.
Okay, Iurij, thank you very much. Let me see if we have some more question from the audience. Okay, here is a question from Albin Sibera from Czechia and Slovenia. Again to Andrea, addressed to Andrea. Can we conclude that there are certain common characteristics of systematic state capture and mafia infiltration of the state, such as, for example, Roberto Saviano described in his non-fiction works? So this is for Andrea again, but I guess everybody can address it if they will.
Yes, I think there are some common characteristics. I think they are more easily found in the literature about social orders and the collective action problem linked to that, and institutions, of course, which tries to describe a very broad range of phenomena. Mafia is included or can be understood also from that perspective, but then the mafia, especially the Italian mafia and the kind of Italian mafia that Saviano describes, has very specific features. But if you look at it through an X-ray, if you look at its position within the power structure, certainly that literature can help. In a book I wrote about Italy, for instance, I try to argue that the mafia, which seems a very archaic institution, survives to this day because it is instrumental in organizing political clientelism on one hand, and in being, if you like, the policeman of corruption exchanges. If I pay a bribe to someone, I cannot go to court to complain that this someone hasn't given me what I wanted with this bribe. So I have to find another way of making sure that the public official I'm paying will stick to his side of the exchange. And in Italy, in some cases, this role is played by the mafia. So the mafia is not just, the picturesque images one has, or even just the drug trade. They are also instrumental in if you like, maintaining structures which are important, not dominant, but important in Italian society, such as political clientelism and corruption.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. We don't have any more questions. So we have 5 minutes to go. So I would like to take the opportunity to ask Andrea a very quick question before we end it. So Andrea, you are talking about collective action, right? And as you point out, collective action is more easily overcome in smaller groups than in larger groups or larger collectives. So the question is, under this logic, you can expect very grave collective action problems in countries like Russia, where you have 150 million people, right? But in smaller countries, then you would expect the otherwise. You would expect that collective action problems are overcome more easily. Take Montenegro, for example, right? 600,000 inhabitants. Shouldn't we expect the absence of state capture there, or a kind of successful attempts to overcome state capture? Because the population is much smaller than in some other countries. Would you expect that people overcome collective action problems in smaller communities in terms of size more easily than in larger states such as Russia and some other large state?
Well, I think yes, it is easier. But I also think that it's a question of the balance between the cohesion of the organized minority and the degree to which the disorganized majority manages to organize. So in a smaller society, it's certainly easier, but if this smaller society faces a very homogeneous and cohesive organized elite, then it is more difficult. In a larger society, you might also have a less homogeneous elite, a wider and broader elite, maybe divided within factions that maybe they have the same long-term interest, but maybe by mistake they begin quarreling and they weaken themselves. In a place like Montenegro, of which I know very little, maybe the size of the state is such that the elite is very small and very cohesive and fairly well organized. So it is more difficult to challenge. I know a bit more about Kosovo, where the elite is fairly small and fairly cohesive, even if it is divided and quarrels among each other. It is a small country, maybe 3 times Montenegro, but still small. And we have seen some encouraging signs. There was a government for a while led by a controversial person, but a person, Albin Kurti, who certainly put it in the very front of his manifesto to say that he is challenging the predatory elites of Kosovo.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So we came at the end of this panel. This was the first panel, the first academic panel under the title, "Which Theory Does Best Capture State Capture?" And we had 2 participants, Iurij ZARUBIN and Andrea Lorenzo CAPUSSELA, and Miloš RESIMIĆ, who was discussant. My name is Dušan Pavlović. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. And I hope you will enjoy the following panels as well. Goodbye.